Chapter 1. Homecoming Shadows. Master Sergeant Jacob Ford stepped off the transport bus into the humid Texas afternoon, his desert combat boots hitting familiar ground after 18 months in Afghanistan. The gymnasium at Fort Hood buzzed with anticipation. Families clutching homemade signs, children bouncing with excitement, wives adjusting their hair one last time. Jacob scanned the crowd, searching for the faces that had kept him alive through countless firefights and endless desert nights. His marriage to Margie had been rocky before the deployment. High school sweethearts who'd married too young. They'd grown apart as Jacob's military career demanded more time away. When she'd asked for the divorce papers to be signed remotely 6 months into his tour, he'd complied without contest. But Holly, his 8-year-old daughter with her mother's auburn hair and his stubborn chin, remained the center of his universe. Jacob had earned his reputation as one of the Army's most reliable tactical minds. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, countless classified operations that would never appear on any official record. His unit called him Chess Master for his ability to think 10 moves ahead of any enemy. But no amount of strategic planning had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The crowd erupted as soldiers began emerging from the staging area. Jacob shouldered his duffel bag, searching the bleachers for Holly's bright smile. Instead, he spotted Margie near the back, her face pale and drawn. Beside her stood a tall man with graying temples and an expensive suit, Gregory Donovan, the insurance executive she'd married 3 months ago. Jacob had never met him, but something about the man's rigid posture and cold eyes immediately set him on edge. "Daddy." The voice was small, tentative. Jacob spun around and found Holly hiding behind the metal support beams of the bleachers, partially concealed in shadows. His heart stopped. Her beautiful hair had been hacked off in uneven patches, leaving bald spots that looked raw and painful. Around her neck, Jacob's hands clenched into fists, was a black electronic device that looked disturbingly like a dog training collar. His daughter's eyes, once bright with mischief, now darted nervously toward the man in the expensive suit. Jacob dropped his bag and knelt down, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage building in his chest. "Hey, baby girl. Come here." Holly glanced toward Gregory Donovan, who was watching them with hawk-like intensity. She approached slowly, and Jacob noticed the slight flinch when he reached to embrace her. "Daddy," she whispered, her words barely audible over the celebration around them. "He made me call him father," or he pressed the button. Her small hand touched the collar. "Mom said you're a cowardly, weak soldier who abandoned us." Every muscle in Jacob's body went rigid. 18 months of combat had honed his ability to compartmentalize, but this hit him like shrapnel to the heart. He forced his voice to remain calm, though his mind was already calculating angles and exits. "Who hurt you, Holly?" Before she could answer, Gregory Donovan approached with Margie trailing behind. The man's smile was perfectly practiced, the kind Jacob had seen on politicians and used car salesmen. "Jacob, finally back. I'm Gregory Donovan, Margie's husband." He extended his hand, which Jacob ignored. "Holly's been telling stories again. Kids and their imagination, you know." Jacob rose slowly, his 6'2" frame matching Gregory's height, but carrying the lean muscle of a man who'd spent years in active combat. "Stories. The collar is a medical device," Gregory said smoothly. "Holly has been having behavioral issues. The doctor recommended." "Which doctor?" Jacob's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. Gregory's smile faltered slightly. "Dr. Morrison at the Children's Psychiatric Facility. Holly's been having violent episodes, attacking other children. The device provides gentle correction when she becomes agitated." Jacob looked down at his daughter, who was staring at the ground. Every instinct told him Gregory was lying, but he needed more information before acting. Years of military intelligence had taught him patience, even when his blood was boiling. "I'd like to speak with this doctor," Jacob said. "Of course. Monday morning. But right now, we should let Holly rest. She's had a difficult adjustment period." Gregory placed his hand on Holly's shoulder, and Jacob noticed her flinch again. Margie finally spoke, her voice tight with something that might have been guilt. "Jacob, maybe it's better if you ease back into things. Holly's been through a lot of changes." Jacob studied his ex-wife's face. The woman he'd once loved looked exhausted, her makeup unable to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She avoided his gaze entirely. "Holly, Jacob said, crouching down again. Would you like to come to dinner with Daddy tomorrow? Before Holly could answer, Gregory interjected. Actually, Holly's grounded for the next few weeks. Another behavioral incident at school. Jacob's training kicked in. This wasn't a conversation, it was reconnaissance. He needed to gather intelligence before making his move. But as he looked at his daughter's haunted eyes and that obscene collar around her neck, one thing became crystal clear. Gregory Donovan had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 2. Intelligence Gathering. The Motel 6, off Interstate 35, wasn't exactly the homecoming Jacob had envisioned, but it served his purposes. He'd checked in under an assumed name, an old habit from his intelligence days, and spent the night planning his next moves. By 0600 hours, he was positioned in his rental car across the street from Holly's school, a steaming cup of gas station coffee in his hands, and a pair of military-grade binoculars in his lap. Lincoln Elementary was a typical suburban school, all red brick and cheerful playground equipment. Jacob watched the morning drop-off routine, cataloging every detail. At 7:47 a.m., Gregory's black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Holly emerged from the passenger seat, moving with the careful deliberation of a child trying not to trigger punishment. Even from a distance, Jacob could see the collar beneath her turtleneck sweater. His phone buzzed. Aaron Robinson, his former unit's intelligence specialist, now worked private security in Austin. Chess Master. Heard you were back stateside. Need anything? Intel package. Gregory Donovan, insurance executive, married my ex-wife 3 months ago. I need everything: financials, employment history, criminal background, associates, medical records if you can get them. Something wrong. Jacob watched Holly disappear into the school building. He's hurting my daughter. The line went quiet for several seconds. Aaron had 2 daughters of his own. Give me 6 hours. Jacob's next stop was the offices of Dr. Jorge Morrison, the psychiatrist Gregory had mentioned. The building was modern glass and steel, the kind of place that charged $300 an hour to tell parents their children needed medication. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, glanced up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? I'm Holly Ford's father. I just returned from deployment and wanted to discuss her treatment plan. The woman's expression changed. Oh, Mr. Ford. I'm sorry, but Holly isn't a patient here. We don't have any records under that name. Jacob felt the familiar cold focus that had served him well in combat zones. Gregory had lied about the doctor, which meant everything else was likely fabrication too. Could you check under Holly Donovan? I'm sorry, but even if we had a patient by that name, I couldn't discuss it without proper authorization. Jacob thanked her and left, but not before noting the security cameras and access protocols. Old habits. His phone rang as he reached the parking lot. Stuart Boyer, his former commanding officer, now worked at the Pentagon. Jacob, welcome home, soldier. What can I do for you? I need a favor, Colonel. Unofficial channels. Can you run a background check on Gregory Donovan? I think he's involved in something that could hurt my daughter. Send me what you have. I'll see what I can dig up. Jacob's next stop was the most important, Holly's school. He presented his military ID and deployment orders to the principal, Mrs. Deanna Brandt, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who immediately put him at ease. Mr. Ford, welcome home. Holly speaks about you constantly. Her expression grew concerned. Though I must say, we've been worried about some changes in her behavior lately. What kind of changes? She's become very withdrawn. Flinches when adults speak loudly, seems constantly anxious. And there was an incident last week. Mrs. Brandt hesitated. Holly collapsed during recess. When the nurse examined her, she found some kind of electronic device around her neck. Holly became hysterical when we tried to remove it, saying her father would be angry. Jacob's jaw tightened. Did you contact Child Protective Services? We tried, but Mr. Donovan arrived with documentation from a psychiatrist claiming it was a medical device for a behavioral disorder. He was quite forceful in his explanations. Threatened to sue the district if we interfered with Holly's medical treatment. Which psychiatrist? Dr. Morrison, I believe. Though when I called to verify, they said they had no record of Holly as a patient. Jacob spent the next hour reviewing Holly's school records. Her grades had plummeted since Gregory entered the picture. Teacher notes described a previously outgoing child becoming increasingly isolated and fearful. By afternoon, Aaron Robinson had delivered his intelligence package. Jacob reviewed the files in his motel room, his blood pressure rising with each page. Gregory Donovan had a history. 3 previous marriages, all ending in acrimonious divorces. 2 involved accusations of domestic violence that were later dropped when the wives suddenly refused to cooperate with prosecutors. No criminal convictions, but a pattern emerging. More disturbing were Gregory's business dealings. His insurance company specialized in life insurance policies for military families. Jacob's deployment had made Margie eligible for a substantial policy. Gregory had a history of targeting war widows and divorcees, marrying them quickly and isolating them from support networks. But the real bombshell came in the final page of Aaron's report. Gregory Donovan had been investigated by the FBI 3 years ago in connection with the suspicious death of his second wife, Tricia Donovan. She died in a house fire while he was conveniently out of town on business. The insurance payout was substantial, and while Gregory was never charged, the case remained technically open. Jacob set down the file and stared at the motel room's water-stained ceiling. This wasn't just about child abuse. Gregory Donovan was a predator who had systematically targeted vulnerable women and their children. He'd married Margie not for love, but for access to her military benefits and life insurance policy. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or your daughter pays the price. This is your only warning." Jacob smiled grimly. Gregory had just confirmed everything Jacob suspected and made his biggest tactical error. You never threaten a Special Forces operator's child and expect them to back down. It was time to start planning Gregory Donovan's downfall. Chapter 3: The Art of War. Jacob spent the next 48 hours conducting surveillance that would make his former CIA contacts proud. Gregory Donovan maintained a carefully constructed facade, but Jacob had learned to see through deception in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Gregory's routine was predictable. Morning gym session at an upscale fitness club, office until 6 p.m., then home to the suburban house where he held Jacob's daughter prisoner. But it was Gregory's Thursday night activities that provided the opening Jacob needed. Following Gregory through Austin's business district, Jacob watched him enter a high-end gentleman's club called the Executive Suite. Using techniques perfected in urban warfare environments, Jacob positioned himself across the street and documented Gregory's activities through the window. Gregory wasn't there for the entertainment. He was conducting business meetings with 3 other men. One face stood out: Maurice Ingram, a recently widowed Austin businessman whose wife had died in a car accident 6 months ago. Jacob had read about the case, suspicious circumstances, but no charges filed. Ingram looked nervous, constantly checking his phone while Gregory spoke in animated gestures. Jacob's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Colonel Boyer. "Your boy Gregory is dirty. FBI has been watching him for 2 years. Can't get enough evidence to prosecute, but they suspect he's running an insurance fraud ring targeting military families and recent widows." Attached file contains surveillance photos and suspected associates. The photos confirmed what Jacob had witnessed. Gregory wasn't just abusing children. He was orchestrating a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The FBI suspected him of arranging accidents for clients who wanted to cash in on their spouse's life insurance policies. Jacob returned to his motel and opened his laptop. Years of military intelligence work had taught him to build detailed operational plans, and Gregory Donovan was about to discover what happened when you threatened a tactical expert's family. His phone rang at 2,300 hours. Margie's voice was barely a whisper. "Jacob? I need to see you. Can you meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on 6th Street? The one near the university. Are you safe?" "For now. He thinks I'm at my sister's house. I told him Deborah needed help with her kids." Margie's voice broke slightly. "Jacob, I made a terrible mistake. I thought he loved us, but God, what he's done to Holly. Tomorrow at 1,400 hours. Come alone." Jacob arrived early and chose a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances, another old habit. When Margie appeared, he barely recognized her. The confident woman he'd married had been replaced by someone who moved like a frightened animal. She sat down carefully, wincing slightly. Jacob noticed the faded bruise on her wrist, partially concealed by long sleeves. "He hits you too." Margie nodded, tears flowing freely. "It started small, controlling what I wore, who I could see. Then the verbal abuse. Then," she pulled down her sleeve, revealing finger-shaped bruises. But Jacob, what he's doing to Holly is so much worse. Tell me everything. The story that emerged was worse than Jacob's darkest suspicions. Gregory had isolated Margie from her family and friends, convinced her that Jacob was a deadbeat father who would never pay child support. He'd gradually increased his control over Holly, using the shock collar to train her like an animal. He calls it behavior modification, says Holly needs to learn respect and obedience. If she speaks without permission, if she doesn't clean her room perfectly, if she even looks at him wrong. Margie's voice shook. He makes me watch sometimes. Says it's my fault for raising a disobedient child. Jacob's hands clenched, but he kept his voice steady. Why didn't you leave? I tried. 3 weeks ago, I packed our bags while he was at work. But he has cameras everywhere. Jacob. He knew before I even reached the car. And he said, Margie's voice dropped to a whisper. He said if I ever tried to leave again, Holly would disappear. That he had friends who could make it look like a runaway situation, and no one would ever find her. Jacob processed this information with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. Gregory wasn't just an abuser. He was a sophisticated predator with resources and connections. I've been documenting everything, Margie continued, pulling out a small digital camera. Photos of Holly's injuries, recordings of Gregory's threats. I've been hiding it in my car's glove compartment. Jacob reviewed the images on the camera's display, his jaw tightening with each photo. The evidence was damning. Clear documentation of systematic child abuse that would put Gregory away for years. Margie, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you get Holly out of the house tomorrow night? He never lets us leave together anymore. Says I might try to run again. What about Saturday? Does he have any regular commitments? Margie thought for a moment. He plays poker every other Saturday with some business associates. Usually doesn't come home until after midnight. Perfect. Saturday night, you take Holly to your sister's house. Tell Gregory she has the flu and you're worried about contamination. Make up any story, but get her away from that house. What are you going to do? Jacob's smile was the one his enemies had learned to fear in Afghanistan. I'm going to give Gregory Donovan exactly what he deserves. But first, I need you to help me get into his house. I need access to his computer and files. Jacob, you can't just. Margie. His voice carried the authority of a man who'd commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations. Gregory Donovan made the mistake of threatening my daughter. He's about to learn that some wars you can't win. As they parted ways, Jacob was already mentally reviewing the detailed building plans he'd need to acquire and the specialized equipment required for his operation. Gregory Donovan had built his life on causing fear and suffering. It was time to show him what real fear looked like. Chapter 4. Infiltration Protocols. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp clarity of a winter night. Jacob positioned himself in the tree line behind Gregory's suburban fortress, a sprawling 2-story house in an upscale development where neighbors minded their own business and security cameras were more for show than function. Through his night vision scope, he watched Gregory's Mercedes disappear down the street at 8:47 p.m. Margie had texted 30 minutes earlier, H safe with Deborah, told him stomach flu. He believed it. Jacob had spent 3 days preparing for this infiltration. His military contacts had provided him with equipment that technically didn't exist, electronic lock picks developed for special operations, micro cameras designed for intelligence gathering, and signal jammers that could disable residential security systems without leaving traces. The house's alarm system was expensive but predictable. Jacob had observed Gregory's routine for entering the security code. A fatal mistake many homeowners made was using the same 4-digit sequence repeatedly. From his surveillance position, Jacob had documented Gregory entering 1-9-8-7, likely his birth year. Jacob approached the back door at 9:15 p.m., moving with the silent precision that had made him legendary among his peers. The electronic lockpick made quick work of the deadbolt, and the security system accepted Gregory's code without protest. Inside, the house revealed Gregory's true nature. The living areas were pristine, designed to impress visitors, but Jacob's trained eye caught the details others would miss. Reinforced locks on interior doors, cameras positioned to monitor movement throughout the house, and, most tellingly, a modified basement door with multiple deadbolts. Jacob's first priority was Gregory's home office, a mahogany-paneled room that screamed expensive taste. The computer was password protected, but Jacob had anticipated this. Stuart Boyer had connected him with Franklin Doherty, a former NSA specialist who now worked private cybersecurity. Most people use personal information for passwords, Franklin had explained. Family birthdays, anniversary dates, pet names. Once you understand their psychology, it's surprisingly predictable. Jacob tried several combinations before hitting pay dirt. Father, 1987. The hubris was almost insulting. What he found on Gregory's computer confirmed his worst suspicions and revealed depths of depravity he hadn't imagined. Detailed files on multiple women, war widows, recent divorcees, single mothers. Each file contained personal information, financial records, and what appeared to be strategic notes on emotional manipulation. Margie's file made Jacob's blood run cold. Gregory had been stalking her for months before they'd met, learning about their marriage problems through social media and mutual acquaintances. He'd orchestrated their chance meeting at a coffee shop, playing the sympathetic ear to a lonely military wife. But it was the basement that revealed Gregory's true nature. Jacob descended the reinforced stairs and found a space that belonged in a horror movie. The walls were soundproofed, and multiple restraint devices were mounted at child height. A cabinet contained various training devices, shock collars, stress positions restraints, and psychological conditioning materials. Most disturbing was the video equipment. Gregory had been recording his sessions with Holly, creating a library of abuse footage. Jacob's hands shook as he copied the files to his encrypted drive, each video timestamp representing another moment of his daughter's suffering. But the final piece of evidence was what Jacob needed most: Gregory's insurance files. The computer contained detailed records of the fraud ring Aaron had suspected. Gregory wasn't just abusing children. He was arranging accidents for clients who wanted to cash in on their spouse's life insurance policies. Maurice Ingram's file was particularly damning. Gregory had detailed plans for arranging Morris's wife's car accident, complete with mechanical sabotage specifications and timing schedules. The FBI had been right. Gregory was running a murder-for-hire operation disguised as an insurance business. Jacob photographed everything, downloaded files, and planted microcameras in strategic locations. But as he prepared to leave, he heard the garage door opening. Gregory was home early. Jacob quickly shut down the computer and moved to the living room window. Gregory's Mercedes sat in the driveway, but the man himself was nowhere to be seen. Then Jacob heard it. The distinctive sound of someone entering through the front door. Margie? Holly? Why are all the lights off? Jacob had approximately 30 seconds before Gregory would check the alarm system and realize it had been disarmed. Moving with practiced stealth, he slipped out the back door and activated the electronic lockpick in reverse, securing the deadbolt behind him. He was 50 yards into the treeline when Gregory's voice erupted from the house. Margie, get down here now. Jacob's phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Margie. He's calling. Should I answer? Jacob typed back. Yes. Tell him you're at the hospital with Holly. Food poisoning. You'll be home tomorrow. From his position in the woods, Jacob watched Gregory moving through the house, checking rooms and clearly agitated. The man's carefully constructed facade was cracking. He was used to having complete control over his environment. Jacob smiled grimly. Phase 1 was complete. He had everything he needed to destroy Gregory Donovan. The evidence of child abuse, insurance fraud, and murder conspiracy would put him away for life. But Jacob wasn't interested in letting the legal system handle this. Gregory had tortured his daughter and threatened to make her disappear. Some crimes required a more personal response. As Jacob withdrew through the darkness, he was already planning Gregory's final lesson in fear. The predator was about to become prey, and Jacob Ford was about to remind everyone why his unit had called him the chess master. Gregory Donovan's game was over. He just didn't know it yet. Chapter 5, Setting the Trap. Monday morning brought Jacob to the FBI field office in Austin, where he met with Special Agent Kelly Osborne, a 15-year veteran who specialized in white-collar crime. Aaron Robinson had made the introduction, vouching for Jacob's military service and the credibility of his evidence. Agent Osborne reviewed Jacob's files with the focused intensity of someone who'd seen too many cases slip away on technicalities. This is incredible work, Sergeant Ford. We've been trying to build a case against Donovan for 2 years, but we could never get inside his operation. What's your next move? Normally, we'd want to conduct our own surveillance, build an independent case. But given the immediate danger to your daughter, Agent Osborne paused, studying Jacob's expression. How patient are you feeling? Not very. I thought so. Here's what I can offer. We'll expedite the warrants and coordinate with local child protective services. We can have Gregory in custody within 72 hours. Jacob shook his head. He's too smart for a simple arrest. His lawyers will have him out on bail in 6 hours, and then Holly disappears. You said yourself he has connections. Agent Osborne leaned back in her chair. What are you suggesting? Give me 1 week. I'll deliver Gregory to you along with his entire organization, packaged with enough evidence to guarantee conviction. Sergeant Ford, I can't authorize civilian vigilante operations. Jacob smiled, the expression that had preceded some of his most successful missions. I'm not asking for authorization. I'm offering you the biggest insurance fraud bust in Texas history. All I need is your word that you'll be ready to move when I call. Agent Osborne studied him for a long moment. 72 hours. That's all I can give you. After that, we move with what we have. Jacob nodded. 72 hours was more than enough time to destroy Gregory Donovan. His next stop was a meeting with Tomas Strong, a former Special Forces operative who now ran Executive Protection Services in Austin. Tomas had served with Jacob in Afghanistan and owed him several favors. I need a safe house, Jacob explained. Somewhere Gregory can't reach Margie and Holly while I finish this. I've got a place in the hill country. Secure, off-grid, completely invisible. But Jacob. Tomas studied his old friend's expression. What aren't you telling me? I'm going to make Gregory disappear for a while. When he resurfaces, he'll be confessing to everything. Tomas nodded slowly. Need backup. Not for this. But I need you to guarantee Margie and Holly's safety. If something goes wrong, if Gregory's people come looking, you handle it. Consider it done. That evening, Jacob implemented the first phase of his plan. He called Gregory's office from a payphone, using voice modulation software to disguise his identity. Mr. Donovan? This is Detective Kelvin Davis with Austin PD. We need to speak with you about some irregularities in your insurance claims. Can you come to the station tonight? There was a long pause. What kind of irregularities? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. We've had some questions about the Ingram case specifically. Jacob could practically hear Gregory's mind racing. Maurice Ingram's wife's accident was Gregory's most recent operation, and the mention would put him in full panic mode. I'll be there in an hour. Actually, Mr. Donovan, could you meet me at the warehouse district instead? We're conducting a reconstruction of some evidence, and it would be helpful to have you present. Jacob provided an address in an industrial area where his military contacts maintained a secure facility. As expected, Gregory's paranoia kicked in. He wouldn't risk walking into what might be a trap. I think I'd prefer to bring my attorney and meet at the station. Of course. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. then. Detective Davis, badge number 2847. Jacob hung up, knowing Gregory would immediately start making calls to verify the detective's identity. When those calls reached dead ends, Gregory would realize he was being manipulated, but by then, it would be too late. Phase 2 began at midnight. Using information from Gregory's computer, Jacob placed anonymous calls to the Austin Police Department, reporting suspicious activity at 3 addresses associated with Gregory's criminal network. Each call was carefully timed to create maximum confusion and draw law enforcement attention to Gregory's associates. By 2 a.m., Gregory's phone would be ringing constantly as his panic partners realized their operations were being exposed. Jacob wanted Gregory desperate, isolated, and making mistakes. The final piece came Wednesday morning. Jacob used one of Gregory's own tactics against him, placing a call to Maurice Ingram. Mr. Ingram? This is regarding your wife's life insurance claim. We have some questions about the accident. Could you meet us to discuss some irregularities we've discovered? Morris's voice was shaky. What kind of irregularities? Mechanical tampering with the brake lines. We believe your wife's death wasn't accidental, Mr. Ingram. Someone murdered her for the insurance money. There was a long silence. Who? Who would do such a thing? That's what we're trying to determine. But we need your help. Can you meet me tonight at the Riverside warehouse? We have evidence we'd like you to review. Jacob provided the same address he'd given Gregory, knowing that Maurice would immediately call Gregory in panic. 2 desperate men, both believing they were walking into police traps, both convinced the other was trying to eliminate them as witnesses. Jacob checked his watch. 18 hours until his carefully orchestrated confrontation would force Gregory Donovan into the open. The chess pieces were in position. Now it was time for checkmate. Chapter 6: Psychological Warfare. Gregory Donovan hadn't slept in 48 hours. His carefully controlled world was collapsing around him, and he couldn't identify the source of the attacks. Anonymous tips had led police to 3 of his safe houses. 2 associates had disappeared without warning, and now Maurice Ingram was demanding they meet to sort out this police situation. Jacob watched Gregory's deterioration through the surveillance cameras he'd planted in the house. The man was pacing, drinking heavily, and making increasingly erratic phone calls. Perfect. At 3 p.m. Thursday, Jacob implemented the final psychological pressure. He sent an untraceable email to Gregory's business account with a single line. "Holly told me everything." Jacob. Gregory's reaction was immediate and violent. Through the hidden cameras, Jacob watched him smash his laptop against the wall, then grab his phone to call Margie. "Where is she?" Gregory's voice was barely controlled rage. "Where is Holly?" Jacob had prepared Margie for this moment. She was safe at Tomas Strawn's compound with Holly, but Gregory didn't know that. "She's at the doctor." Margie's voice came through the phone, carefully modulated to sound frightened but truthful. "The stomach flu got worse. They're keeping her overnight for observation." "Which hospital?" "St. David's. Room 314. Jacob smiled. There was no room 314 in the pediatric ward, but Gregory's panic would prevent him from thinking clearly. He'd rush to the hospital, confirm Holly wasn't there, and realize Margie was lying. The trap was set for 8 p.m. at the warehouse Jacob had specified. It was a former military storage facility that Aaron Robinson's security company now used for equipment storage. Isolated, soundproofed, and equipped with the kind of interrogation setup that would make Gregory very uncomfortable. At 7:30 p.m., Jacob watched through thermal imaging as Gregory approached the warehouse. The man was armed, a .38 revolver in a shoulder holster, and moving with the paranoid caution of someone who expected an ambush. Maurice Ingram arrived 10 minutes later from the opposite direction, also armed and clearly terrified. The 2 men spotted each other across the empty parking lot and immediately drew their weapons. "You called the police." Maurice screamed. "I did no such thing. You're the one who." "Gentlemen." Jacob's amplified voice echoed across the warehouse district from speakers Aaron had positioned strategically around the building. "You're both right to be paranoid, but you're aiming at the wrong target." Both men spun toward the sound, weapons raised. "I'm Master Sergeant Jacob Ford, United States Army." "Maurice, Gregory murdered your wife." "Gregory, Maurice was planning to testify against you to save his own skin. You're both going to prison for the rest of your lives." Jacob emerged from the shadows, hands visible but ready to move. His body armor was concealed beneath a tactical vest, and his own weapon remained holstered, for now. "But first, Gregory, you're going to answer some questions about what you did to my daughter." Gregory's face twisted with rage and recognition. "You? How did you? Did you really think I wouldn't find out? 18 months in Afghanistan, and you spend that time torturing an 8-year-old girl, teaching her to call you father, while you shock her like an animal." Maurice looked confused. "Gregory, what is he talking about?" "Nothing. He's lying. His daughter is disturbed. She needs discipline." Jacob's movement was lightning fast. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance and drove his knee into Gregory's solar plexus, dropping the man to his knees while simultaneously disarming him. "Wrong answer." Maurice raised his weapon toward Jacob, but found himself staring down the barrel of Jacob's Sig Sauer P320, a pistol that had never missed its target in 3 combat tours. "Maurice, you have a choice. Help me get justice for a tortured child, or go down with the man who murdered your wife. What's it going to be?" Maurice's hand was shaking badly. He really killed Linda? Jacob tossed Maurice a copy of the files he'd taken from Gregory's computer. Page 14. Complete plans for sabotaging her brake lines. Page 26. Photos of the mechanical work. Page 43. Your signature on the insurance policy that Gregory convinced you to increase 3 months before the accident. Maurice read for several minutes while Gregory gasped for air on the ground. When he finished, Maurice's face had gone white. "You son of a bitch," Maurice whispered, turning toward Gregory. You made me think I wanted her dead. You convinced me I'd be better off without her, that the insurance money would solve all my problems. But you planned it from the beginning. Gregory tried to speak, but Jacob placed his boot on the man's throat. Here's what's going to happen, Jacob said calmly. Gregory, you're going to confess to everything. The insurance fraud, the murders, and what you did to my daughter. Maurice, you're going to testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence. And if we refuse? Gregory wheezed. Jacob's smile was the coldest thing either man had ever seen. Gregory, I've spent 6 years in special operations. I know 17 different ways to cause pain that won't show up on medical exams. I know how to keep a man conscious through injuries that would kill most people. And I know how to make those experiences last for days. Jacob pulled out his phone and showed Gregory a video file. This is security footage from your basement, Gregory. What you did to Holly while I was deployed. Every sick, twisted session you recorded. Gregory's face went ashen as he watched himself torturing a child. Now, Jacob continued, imagine what a jury will think when they see that footage. Imagine what your fellow inmates will do to a child abuser. Or imagine what will happen if you simply disappear tonight and no one ever finds your body. Gregory was hyperventilating now, the full weight of his situation finally sinking in. I'll confess, he whispered. I'll tell them everything. Jacob nodded and made a phone call. Agent Osborne, the package is ready for pickup. As FBI vehicles surrounded the warehouse, Jacob looked down at the broken man who had tortured his daughter. Gregory Donovan would spend the rest of his life in prison, and every day would be a reminder that some fathers will go to any length to protect their children. The chess game was over. Jacob Ford had won. Chapter 7. Confessions and Consequences. The FBI interrogation room at the Austin field office had seen its share of hardened criminals, but Gregory Donovan presented a different kind of challenge. He sat across from Agent Osborne and her partner, Agent Gabriel Kramer, his expensive suit wrinkled and his hands shaking as withdrawal from alcohol and adrenaline took its toll. Jacob watched from behind one-way glass, his presence officially unauthorized but tolerated given his role in bringing down the entire operation. Beside him stood District Attorney Randolph Wilkins, a man whose career had been built on high-profile convictions. Mr. Donovan, Agent Osborne began, placing a thick folder on the table. We have sufficient evidence to charge you with insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and aggravated child abuse. Your cooperation could influence sentencing recommendations. Gregory's lawyer, a nervous man named Stuart Cook who'd been hastily summoned from his dinner, whispered urgently in his client's ear. Gregory shook his head. My client wishes to make a full statement, Stuart announced, his voice betraying his desire to be anywhere else. Agent Kramer activated the recording equipment. Gregory Allen Donovan, you're making this statement voluntarily after being read your Miranda rights. Is that correct? Yes. What followed was 3 hours of the most comprehensive confession Agent Osborne had ever recorded. Gregory detailed his insurance fraud operation, naming associates across 4 states, and providing specific details about 12 arranged accidents spanning 3 years. The murders were planned with chilling precision. Gregory would identify vulnerable clients, usually struggling with debt or failing marriages, and gradually convince them that their spouses' deaths would solve their problems. He'd arrange the accidents through a network of mechanics, private investigators, and hitmen, taking a percentage of the insurance payouts. But it was his confession about Holly that filled the room with tense silence. The child was disobedient, Gregory said, his voice flat and clinical. Military children often have discipline problems due to absent fathers. I implemented a behavioral modification program using standard conditioning techniques. Standard techniques? Agent Osborne's voice was carefully controlled. Shock therapy for negative behaviors, positive reinforcement for compliance. The child learned to respond appropriately to authority. Jacob's hands clenched behind the glass. Even in confession, Gregory was trying to justify his actions with pseudoscientific terminology. Mr. Donovan, Agent Kramer interrupted. You electronically shocked an 8-year-old child. Multiple times. While recording the sessions. How do you justify that? Gregory's mask finally slipped. She needed to learn respect. Her mother was too weak to discipline her properly. Someone had to teach her how to behave. District Attorney Wilkins made notes. This is more than enough for life without parole. But Gregory wasn't finished. As if a dam had burst, he began detailing other victims. Children from previous marriages who'd suffered similar training, women who'd disappeared when they tried to leave him, financial crimes spanning decades. The Trisha fire wasn't supposed to kill her, Gregory said, referring to his second wife. It was meant to be a scare tactic, force her to be more compliant. But the accelerant spread faster than anticipated. Agent Osborne exchanged glances with her partner. They were recording the confession to multiple unsolved murders. At 11:47 p.m., Gregory finally stopped talking. The confession filled 47 pages of transcript and would keep prosecutors busy for years. As Gregory was led away to a holding cell, Jacob finally allowed himself to feel something other than cold, tactical focus. His daughter was safe. The man who'd tortured her would never see freedom again. But there was still one more piece of business to handle. The next morning, Jacob visited Maurice Ingram at the county jail. The man who'd been Gregory's unwilling accomplice looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. He played me, Maurice said, staring at his hands. Made me think Linda was holding me back, that I'd be happier without her. But I loved her, Sergeant Ford. I really loved her. Jacob studied the broken man across the table. The difference between you and Gregory is that you feel remorse. That matters. Will it matter to a jury? Agent Osborne tells me you're cooperating fully. Your testimony will put away several other people in Gregory's network. The DA is considering second-degree murder instead of first-degree. With cooperation, you might see parole in 15 years. Maurice nodded slowly. I deserve whatever I get. But Sergeant Ford, what you did, exposing all this, that took real courage. Jacob shook his head. Courage is what my daughter showed every day she survived Gregory's torture. I just did what any father would do. That afternoon, Jacob met Margie and Holly at Tomas Strong's compound. His daughter looked fragile, but was smiling for the first time since his return. The shock collar was gone, destroyed as evidence, and her hair was already beginning to grow back. Daddy, Holly said, running into his arms. Tomas taught me how to shoot a BB gun. I hit the target 7 times. Jacob laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in weeks. That's my girl. Always aim center mass. Margie approached more cautiously. Jacob, I need to apologize. No. Jacob's voice was firm but gentle. Gregory was a predator. He targeted you specifically because of your situation. You were protecting Holly the only way you could. What happens now? Jacob looked at his daughter, who was showing Tomas her target practice results with the enthusiasm of a normal 8-year-old. Now we rebuild. Gregory's assets are being seized to pay restitution to his victims' families. The house, the cars, everything. But his business insurance policy names you as beneficiary. That's legally yours. Margie's eyes widened. Jacob, I can't. Yes, you can. Use it to get Holly the therapy she needs. Use it to build a new life somewhere Gregory's influence can't reach you. As the sun set over the Texas Hill Country, Jacob watched his daughter chase fireflies in the meadow behind the safe house. Tomorrow would bring challenges, therapy sessions, court appearances, the long process of healing. But tonight, Holly was laughing again. Gregory Donovan had wanted to teach his victims about fear and control. Instead, he learned that some people fight back, and some fathers will move heaven and earth to protect their children. The lesson was complete. Chapter 8, Justice Served. 6 months later, the Hays County Courthouse was packed for the sentencing of Gregory Donovan. Jacob sat in the front row, his dress blues immaculate, Holly beside him in a new dress that Margie had bought for the occasion. His daughter's hair had grown back in soft curls, and the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by something Jacob recognized as hope. Judge Alfred Hardin had presided over hundreds of criminal cases in his 20-year career, but the Gregory Donovan trial had affected him deeply. The evidence presented, particularly the videos of child abuse, had required the court to take frequent recesses as seasoned prosecutors struggled to maintain their composure. Mr. Donovan, Judge Hardin addressed the shackled figure at the defendant's table. In my years on this bench, I have never encountered a more systematic pattern of predatory behavior. Your crimes span multiple states and decades, targeting the most vulnerable members of our society. Gregory stood with his court-appointed attorney. Stuart Cook had withdrawn from the case after the full scope of the evidence became clear. The man who had once commanded fear and respect now looked diminished, his carefully constructed facade completely shattered. District Attorney Wilkins rose to address the court. Your Honor, the state has documented 17 counts of insurance fraud totaling over $3 million, conspiracy in the deaths of 4 individuals, and aggravated child abuse against multiple victims. Mr. Donovan's own confession provided evidence for crimes dating back 15 years. Judge Hardin reviewed the sentencing memorandum. The victims' impact statements paint a picture of trauma that will require years to heal. Holly Ford, through her victim's advocate, has provided a statement that I will read in part. Jacob reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand as the judge read her words. Gregory hurt me and scared me every day. He made me think my daddy didn't love me anymore. But my daddy came back and saved me. I want Gregory to go to jail forever so he can't hurt any more little girls. Gregory's shoulders shook as the impact of his actions was laid bare. For the first time since his arrest, he seemed to understand the full weight of what he'd done. Mr. Donovan, you have pled guilty to multiple felony charges. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to address the court? Gregory stood shakily. His voice was barely audible. I want to say I'm sorry. To Holly, to her family, to all the families I hurt. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need them to know I understand what I did was wrong. Judge Hardin nodded grimly. Mr. Donovan, the court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on the conspiracy to commit murder charges. Additionally, you will serve consecutive sentences totaling 45 years on the fraud and child abuse charges. This court recommends you be held in administrative segregation for your own protection. The gavel fell with finality. Gregory Donovan would die in prison. As court officers led Gregory away, he glanced back at Jacob one final time. There was no anger in his eyes anymore, only the broken recognition of a man who'd finally understood that his actions had consequences. Outside the courthouse, Agent Osborne approached Jacob and Holly. Sergeant Ford, I wanted you to know that Gregory's information has led to arrests in 4 other states. His network has been completely dismantled. What about Maurice Ingram? Pled guilty to conspiracy charges. He'll serve 12 years, but will be eligible for parole in 8 with good behavior. His testimony was instrumental in closing several cases. Jacob nodded. Morris's fate served as a reminder that good people could be manipulated into terrible choices, but ultimately had to face the consequences of their actions. That evening, Jacob took Holly to her favorite restaurant, a family diner that served the kind of comfort food that made everything feel normal again. She was telling him about her new school and her best friend Bethany when she suddenly grew quiet. Daddy, yeah, baby girl. Is Gregory really never coming back? Jacob reached across the table and took her small hands in his. Never, Holly. He can never hurt you again. I promise. She nodded solemnly, then brightened. Mommy says we might get a dog. A real one, not like the bad collar. Jacob laughed. What kind of dog? A big one, like the ones you had in the army. A dog that would protect us. That sounds like a great idea. As they finished dinner, Jacob reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd returned from deployment to find his daughter tortured and traumatized. Tonight, she was talking about getting a pet and making friends at school. The road to recovery would be long. Holly still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at loud noises, still struggled with trust. But she was healing, surrounded by people who loved her and protected by the knowledge that justice had been served. Jacob's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Boyer. Heard about the sentencing. Well done, soldier. Your unit would be proud. Another message came from Aaron Robinson. Poker night this weekend? Time to celebrate properly. Jacob smiled and typed back. Rain check. Taking my daughter fishing this weekend. Some victories were worth savoring quietly, with the people who mattered most. As they walked to the car, Holly slipped her hand into Jacob's. Daddy, what is it, sweetheart? I'm glad you came home. Jacob squeezed her hand gently. Me too, baby girl. Me too. The battle was over. His family was safe. And Gregory Donovan would never hurt another child again. That was all the victory Jacob Ford needed. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 1 year later, Jacob Ford stood in the backyard of their new house in Colorado Springs, watching Holly play fetch with Rex, the German Shepherd puppy they'd adopted 3 months earlier. The mountains provided a backdrop that reminded Jacob why he'd fallen in love with the American West during his childhood visits to his grandfather's ranch. The move had been Margie's idea. Too many memories in Texas, she'd said, and Jacob had agreed. Holly needed a fresh start, somewhere Gregory Donovan's shadow couldn't reach. Colorado offered that. Wide open spaces, clean air, and a military community that understood the challenges of rebuilding after trauma. Jacob had taken early retirement from the Army, using his accumulated leave and the disability compensation from a shoulder injury sustained in Afghanistan. The money from Gregory's seized assets, distributed to victims' families through a court-ordered restitution fund, had provided Holly with a college fund and Margie with the resources to start a non-profit organization supporting military families dealing with domestic abuse. "Daddy, watch this," Holly called out, throwing a tennis ball with remarkable accuracy for a 9-year-old. Rex bounded after it with the enthusiasm that only a young dog could muster. "Nice arm," Jacob called back. "You've been practicing." Holly beamed. The confidence in her voice was something Jacob never took for granted. Every smile, every moment of unself-conscious joy, felt like a small miracle after what they'd been through. Dr. Madeline Sears, Holly's therapist, had warned them that recovery would be measured in years, not months. But Holly was resilient, stronger than Jacob had ever imagined possible. She still had difficult days, moments when unexpected sounds or situations triggered memories of Gregory's abuse. But those moments were becoming less frequent, replaced by the normal concerns of childhood, homework, friends, and whether Rex could learn to shake hands. The doorbell rang, and Jacob heard Margie greeting their guests. Aaron Robinson and his family had driven up from Texas for Holly's birthday party, joined by Tomas Strong and several other members of Jacob's extended military family. These were the people who understood what they'd been through without requiring explanations. "Uncle Aaron," Holly shrieked, abandoning the tennis ball to race toward the house. Aaron Robinson had earned his honorary uncle status through months of patient attention, teaching Holly everything from basic self-defense to how to change a car tire. Practical skills that built confidence along with competence. Jacob followed Holly inside, where the kitchen had been transformed into party central. Margie moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, directing the arrangement of presents and coordinating the arrival of pizza. She looked healthier than she had in years. The stress lines had faded, and her laugh came more easily now. Their relationship remained complicated. They weren't getting remarried. Too much had happened for them to simply return to what they'd been. But they were partners in the most important mission of their lives, helping Holly heal and grow into the remarkable young woman she was destined to become. "How's the new job?" Aaron asked, accepting a beer from Jacob. "Good. Really good." Jacob had taken a position with a private security firm that specialized in protecting corporate executives and their families. The work used his military skills while keeping him close to home. No more deployments, no more months away from Holly. "And the nightmares?" Jacob paused. The nightmares weren't about Afghanistan anymore. They were about arriving too late, about finding Holly hurt beyond saving. Dr. Sears said they were a normal part of processing trauma, but they still left him checking on Holly multiple times each night. "Getting better," Jacob said truthfully. "Therapy helps. And knowing Gregory can never hurt anyone again helps more." Agent Osborne had called the previous month with an update. Gregory Donovan had been found dead in his cell, apparently the victim of an attack by fellow inmates who'd learned about his crimes against children. Jacob felt no satisfaction in the news. Gregory's death didn't undo the damage he'd caused, but there was a sense of closure in knowing the threat was truly gone. "Present time," Margie announced, and the party moved to the living room. Holly opened her gifts with the focused intensity she brought to everything these days, a consequence of learning not to take good things for granted. New books, art supplies, a junior chemistry set that made Jacob slightly nervous, and finally, the big surprise he and Margie had planned together. "This one's from all of us," Jacob said, handing Holly an envelope. Inside was a certificate for horseback riding lessons at a ranch 30 minutes away. Holly's eyes went wide. She'd been talking about wanting to learn to ride ever since they'd moved to Colorado. "Really? I can really learn to ride horses." Every Saturday morning, Margie confirmed. "Mrs. Lori Gates runs the program. She's very experienced with children." Holly threw her arms around both parents simultaneously, the kind of spontaneous affection that still caught Jacob off guard. For so long, Holly had been careful about physical contact, measuring every interaction for potential threat. These moments of unguarded trust felt like gifts. As the party wound down and guests began departing, Jacob found himself on the back porch with Tomas Strong, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You did good, brother," Tomas said. "Both of you. Holly's going to be okay. She's tougher than I ever was at her age. Wonder where she gets that from." Jacob smiled. Her mother, Margie, went through hell and came out fighting for her daughter. That takes a special kind of strength. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing in the clear mountain air. Rex had collapsed in an exhausted heap after a day of intense playing, and Holly was inside helping Margie clean up, chattering about her upcoming horseback riding lessons. "Any regrets?" Tomas asked. "About how you handled Gregory?" Jacob considered the question. He'd broken laws, operated outside legal boundaries, and used skills acquired in military service for personal vengeance. By strict ethical standards, his actions were questionable at best. "No," he said finally. "Gregory chose to hurt my daughter. Everything that happened after that was just consequence." Tomas nodded. "Some things are more important than regulations." Later that evening, after the dishes were cleaned and the leftover cake carefully wrapped, Jacob tucked Holly into bed. It was a ritual they'd established when they moved to Colorado. Time for her to talk about her day, ask questions, or simply enjoy the security of having her father nearby. "Daddy." Holly's voice was sleepy but content. "What is it, sweetheart? Do you think Gregory was always bad, or did something make him that way?" Jacob paused, surprised by the complexity of the question. Dr. Sears had encouraged Holly to talk about her experiences, to ask the difficult questions that would help her process what had happened. "I think some people make bad choices," Jacob said carefully. "And when they keep making bad choices, it becomes easier to make more bad choices. But everyone has the chance to choose differently." Holly considered this. "He chose to hurt me." "Yes, he did. And that was wrong. But you chose to save me. Every time, baby girl. Every time." Holly smiled and closed her eyes. "I'm glad you're my daddy." Jacob sat beside her bed until her breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly made his way to the living room where Margie was finishing the last of the cleanup. "Good party," he said. "She's happy. Really happy. That's what matters." Jacob nodded, watching through the window as Rex investigated something interesting in the corner of the yard. "Margie, I need to say something." She looked up from the dishwasher. "Thank you. For protecting her when I couldn't. For being strong enough to survive Gregory and smart enough to document what he was doing. Without that evidence." "Jacob," Margie's voice was firm. "We both did what we had to do. Holly survived because she's got two parents who love her more than anything else in the world. They stood together in the quiet kitchen, two people who'd been through the worst kind of crisis and emerged as better versions of themselves. Not the same people they'd been before Gregory Donovan entered their lives, but stronger, more focused on what truly mattered." Outside, the Colorado night was crisp and clear, full of stars and possibilities. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully, protected by love and the knowledge that justice had been served. Jacob Ford had completed his most important mission. His family was safe, his daughter was healing, and the man who'd threatened everything he held dear would never hurt another child. Some stories end with victory in battle. This one ended with something more valuable. A little girl who could laugh again, dream again, and trust again. That was worth every risk Jacob had taken. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.